Welcome back to the Nightfall Archive, my fellow night owls and lovers of the dark and unexplained. To those of you who have been with me from the beginning, thank you for your patience and your loyalty. It means more than you know. And to those of you who are new here, welcome to the community. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and join us on this journey into the shadows. You're in for quite an experience. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to apologize for my absence these past several days. I ran into some unexpected health issues that needed my immediate attention. Thankfully, everything has been sorted out now, and I'm feeling much better. I appreciate all of you who reached out with kind words and concern. This community truly is something special. Now, with that said, I think it's only right that I make it up to you with something truly unsettling. Tonight's story comes from the deep hollows and ancient ridges of Appalachia, where the mountains keep secrets older than memory itself. This account was submitted to me by a man named Marcus, and what he experienced in those hills still haunts him to this day. So settle in, dim the lights if you dare, and let me take you into the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. I never thought I'd set foot on that land again. My name is Marcus, and in the fall of 2019, I received a phone call that would change my life in ways I still don't fully understand. My Uncle Earl had passed away. He was 78 years old and had lived alone on the family property deep in the mountains of eastern Kentucky for as long as I could remember. The property had been in our family for generations, passed down from father to son since before the Civil War. And now, according to the lawyer who called me, it was mine. I hadn't seen Uncle Earl in almost 15 years. There was no bad blood between us or anything like that. Life just happened, as it does. I moved to Columbus for work after college, got married, got divorced, and somewhere along the way, the mountains of my childhood became nothing more than a distant memory. Uncle Earl wasn't much for phone calls or letters, and my father, his brother, had passed away when I was 22. After that, the connections just slowly faded. But I remembered that land. God, I remembered it well. As a kid, I spent summers there with my dad, hiking the ridges and swimming in the creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. The forest was thick and ancient, full of oak and hickory and poplar trees that had been growing since before this country was founded. There was something magical about it back then, something that made you feel small in the best possible way, like you were part of something bigger and older than yourself. The property consisted of about 200 acres of mostly untouched woodland, along with an old farmhouse that Uncle Earl had maintained over the years. When I was a kid, there was also a barn and a few outbuildings, though I wasn't sure what condition they'd be in now. The lawyer told me that Uncle Earl had left everything to me, the land, the house, and whatever was inside it. He said I should come down as soon as possible to sort through things and decide what I wanted to do with the property. So, in mid-October, I took 2 weeks off work and made the drive down from Columbus. It was about a 4-hour trip, the last hour of which took me deeper and deeper into the mountains on roads that got progressively narrower and more winding. Cell service dropped off about 30 minutes before I reached the property. By the time I pulled onto the old dirt road that led up to the house, I felt like I had driven back in time. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but it was in better shape than I expected. Uncle Earl had kept it up well. It was a 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch. The tin roof had some rust on it, but it looked solid. There was a stone chimney on one side that I remembered my father telling me was original to the house, built sometime in the 1840s. I parked my truck in front of the house and sat there for a moment, just taking it all in. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and wood smoke from somewhere far off. The trees were in full autumn color, reds and oranges and yellows spreading across the hillsides like fire. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache with something I couldn't quite name. Nostalgia, maybe, or something deeper. I grabbed my bags from the truck and headed up to the porch. The lawyer had mailed me the keys, so I let myself in without any trouble. The inside of the house was exactly what you'd expect from an old man who had lived alone for decades. It was clean enough, but cluttered with a lifetime of accumulation. Stacks of newspapers and magazines, old furniture covered in quilts and afghans. A gun rack on the wall with 3 rifles and a shotgun. The kitchen still had dishes in the drying rack beside the sink, as if Uncle Earl had just finished his last meal and stepped out for a moment. I spent the first day just getting settled in and taking stock of things. I turned on the water and the electricity, which the lawyer had arranged to keep running. I checked the wood stove in the living room and found it in working order, which was good because the nights were already getting cold. I explored the rooms upstairs, finding Uncle Earl's bedroom, a small bathroom, and a spare room that looked like it had been used for storage. It was in that spare room that I found the first thing that struck me as odd. Pushed into the corner, almost hidden behind stacks of old boxes, was a trunk. It was old, made of wood and iron, and it had a padlock on it. What caught my attention wasn't the trunk itself, but what was on top of it. Someone had placed a Bible there, open and face down, as if marking a page, and around the trunk, in a rough circle on the dusty floor, was a line of what looked like salt. I stood there staring at it for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Uncle Earl had never been a particularly religious man, at least not that I remembered, and the salt, that was something else entirely. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up for reasons I couldn't explain. I decided to leave the trunk alone for now. I had plenty of other things to sort through, and there was something about that setup that made me not want to disturb it, at least not yet. That first night, I made myself a simple dinner from the supplies I had brought with me and sat out on the porch as the sun went down. The mountains turned purple and then black as the light faded, and the stars came out in a way you never see in the city. Thousands of them, millions of them, scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds. The only sounds were the wind in the trees and the occasional call of a screech owl somewhere in the distance. I felt at peace for the first time in a long time. Whatever stress and worry I had brought with me from my regular life seemed to melt away in the presence of those ancient hills. I understood then why Uncle Earl had never left this place. Why would you, when you had this? I went to bed around 10, sleeping in the downstairs bedroom off the kitchen that I had claimed for myself. Uncle Earl's bedroom upstairs didn't feel right to use. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the drive and the emotional weight of the day, and for a few hours, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. I woke up sometime around 3 in the morning. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own breathing and the settling sounds of the old house. Then I heard it again, the sound that had pulled me from sleep. Footsteps. They were coming from the porch, slow and deliberate, moving from one end to the other. The boards of the porch creaked under the weight of whoever was walking on them. I lay perfectly still, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest. I told myself it was probably just an animal, a raccoon or a possum, maybe a deer that had wandered too close to the house. That's all it was. But the footsteps sounded heavy, too heavy for any animal I could think of. They stopped right outside my window. I held my breath, not daring to move. Through the thin curtains, I could see nothing but darkness. No shadow, no shape, nothing to indicate that anyone was there. But I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that someone was standing just a few feet away from me, separated only by a pane of glass and a thin cotton curtain. A minute passed, then another. The silence was absolute, and then the footsteps resumed, moving away from the window, down the porch steps, and out into the night. I heard them crunching through the leaves for a few seconds, and then nothing. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, I went outside to check the porch. I don't know what I expected to find, but I had to look. The boards were weathered and gray, covered in a thin layer of dust and fallen leaves, and there, clearly visible in the dust, were footprints. They were boot prints, the kind made by heavy work boots with thick treads. They led from the steps along the length of the porch and stopped right outside my bedroom window. Then they continued off the porch and down toward the tree line, where they disappeared into the forest. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints. Someone had been here last night. Someone had walked right up to my window and stood there, looking in. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a neighbor checking on the property. Maybe someone from town who had heard about Uncle Earl's passing and wanted to see if anyone was around. That made sense, right? It was a small community. People looked out for each other. But why come in the middle of the night? Why not knock on the door or call out? Why stand outside my window in the darkness? I couldn't answer those questions, and the more I thought about them, the more unsettled I became. I decided to focus on work. There was plenty to keep me busy, and I figured the best thing I could do was stay occupied and not let my imagination run away with me. I spent the morning going through the kitchen and living room, sorting things into piles for keeping, donating, and throwing away. It was tedious work, but it kept my mind off the events of the night before. Around noon, I took a break and went for a walk around the property. The land was just as beautiful as I remembered, maybe even more so in the autumn light. I followed the old path down to the creek and sat on a flat rock by the water, listening to it gurgle and splash over the stones. I felt some of the tension drain out of my shoulders. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. On the far side of the creek, maybe 50 yards into the trees, someone was standing there, watching me. I couldn't make out any details. The figure was too far away, partially obscured by the undergrowth, but I could see enough to know it was a person. They were standing perfectly still, not moving, not calling out, just watching. I raised my hand in a tentative wave. No response. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the hillsides and faded into nothing. "Can I help you?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond. A cold feeling crept up my spine. I stood up from the rock, keeping my eyes on the figure. Should I go over there? Should I demand to know who they were and what they wanted? I took a step toward the creek, and the figure moved. It stepped backward, slowly, and seemed to melt into the shadows of the forest. One moment it was there, and the next it was gone, as if it had never existed at all. I stood there for several minutes, scanning the tree line, looking for any sign of movement. There was nothing, just the trees and the wind, and the endless shadows between them. I went back to the house. That evening, I decided to drive into town. I needed a few supplies, and more importantly, I needed to be around people. Normal people doing normal things. The isolation of the property, which had seemed so peaceful yesterday, now felt oppressive in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The closest town was a place called Harlan's Creek. About 20 minutes down the mountain. It wasn't much, just a few streets clustered around a main drag with a general store, a diner, a post office, and a handful of other small businesses. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business, and strangers stand out like a sore thumb. I parked in front of the general store and headed inside. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a bun and sharp eyes that looked me up and down as I walked in. "You must be Earl's nephew," she said before I could even open my mouth. I blinked, taken aback. "How did you know that?" She smiled, but there was something guarded in her expression. "Small town. Word travels fast. I'm Mabel Hoskins. I was sorry to hear about Earl. He was a good man." "Thank you," I said. "I'm Marcus." "I know who you are," she said. "Earl talked about you sometimes. Said you used to come down here when you were a kid. Said you were a good boy." That hit me harder than I expected. The idea that Uncle Earl had thought about me, talked about me, even though we hadn't spoken in years. I felt a sudden pang of guilt for letting so much time pass. "He ever talk about anything else?" I asked, not entirely sure why I was asking. "Anything about the property? Any problems he might have been having?" Mabel's expression changed. It was subtle, but I caught it. A flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Concern? "What kind of problems?" she asked carefully. I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I also wanted answers. "Someone was on my porch last night, walking around in the middle of the night. And today, I saw someone watching me from the woods." Mabel's lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced toward the door, as if making sure no one else was listening, then leaned in closer. "How long you planning on staying up there?" she asked quietly. "I took 2 weeks off work." "Why?" She shook her head slowly. "Earl started having trouble a few years back. Said people were coming onto his property at night. Said he'd see them watching from the trees, just like you described. He tried to catch them a few times, but they were always gone by the time he got close." My blood ran cold. "Who were they?" "Don't know," Mabel said. "Earl had his theories, but he never said them out loud. Not to me, anyway. All I know is he started keeping to himself more and more. Stopped coming into town as often. Last time I saw him, maybe a month before he passed, he looked haunted, Marcus. There ain't no other word for it. Like he'd seen something that scared him down to his bones." I stood there, processing what she was telling me. Did anyone go up there to check on him? Did anyone try to help? Mabel looked away. "Folks around here, we mind our own business, especially when it comes to things up in those hills. There's stuff up there that's been around longer than any of us, longer than this town. Earl knew that. We all do." "What does that mean?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "What kind of stuff?" But Mabel was done talking. She stepped back from the counter and gestured toward the shelves. "Get what you need. I'll ring you up." I tried to press her further, but she wouldn't say another word about it. When I left the store, she called after me, "Marcus." I turned back. "Be careful up there. And whatever you do, don't go out at night. Stay inside after dark. Keep the doors locked. And if you hear someone calling your name from outside, don't answer. Don't go to the door. Just stay inside and wait for morning." Before I could respond, she turned away and disappeared into the back of the store. I drove back to the property with Mabel's words echoing in my head. I wanted to dismiss what she had said as small-town superstition, the kind of folklore that gets passed down in isolated communities. But I couldn't shake the memory of those footsteps on the porch, the figure standing motionless in the trees. Something was wrong here. Something had been wrong for a while. When I got back to the house, the sun was already starting to sink toward the ridgeline. I had maybe an hour of daylight left. Instead of going inside, I found myself walking around to the back of the house, toward the old barn that I remembered from my childhood. The barn was in worse shape than the house. The roof had partially collapsed on one side, and the whole structure leaned slightly, as if a strong wind might push it over, but the doors were still intact, held closed by a heavy chain and padlock. Why would Uncle Earl lock up an old barn? I went back to the house and searched through the drawers in the kitchen until I found a ring of keys. It took some trial and error, but eventually I found one that fit the padlock on the barn doors. Inside, the barn was dark and musty, filled with the smell of old hay and rotting wood. I used the flashlight on my phone to look around. Most of it was what I expected. Old farm equipment, rusted tools, stacks of lumber that had been sitting there for decades. But in the back corner, I found something else. There was a hole in the floor. Not a natural hole, but something that had been deliberately dug. It was maybe 4 feet in diameter and lined with stones, like an old well. A wooden cover had been placed over it, but the cover was pushed aside, revealing the dark opening beneath. I shone my light down into the hole and felt my stomach drop. There were ladders going down, rough wooden ladders that had been nailed to the stone walls. The hole went down at least 20 feet, maybe more. At the bottom, I could see the beginning of a tunnel that extended off into darkness. What the hell was this? I stood there, staring down into that black opening, and felt a wave of wrongness wash over me. This wasn't a well. This wasn't a root cellar. This was something else. Something that had been here for a long time. Something that Uncle Earl had known about. And suddenly, I remembered the trunk in the spare room, the Bible, the circle of salt. Uncle Earl hadn't just been a lonely old man living out his days in the mountains. He had been guarding something, protecting something, or maybe protecting himself from something. I backed away from the hole and left the barn, making sure to lock the doors behind me. My hands were shaking as I walked back to the house. The sun had disappeared behind the mountains now, and the shadows were growing long and deep. I went inside and locked the doors, just as Mabel had told me to. I closed all the curtains and turned on every light in the house. Then I went to the gun rack in the living room and took down the shotgun. I found a box of shells in a drawer nearby and loaded it. I sat in the living room with the gun across my lap and waited for night to fall. The night passed without incident. I sat up until almost 4 a.m, listening for footsteps that never came. At some point, exhaustion overtook me, and I dozed off in the chair. When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and birds were singing outside. I felt foolish sitting there with a shotgun in my lap. In the light of day, everything that had happened seemed less threatening, more explainable. The footsteps could have been an animal after all, a large one like a bear. The figure in the woods could have been a hiker or a hunter. The hole in the barn was strange, sure. But old properties in Appalachia were full of strange things. Root cellars, mine shafts, moonshine stills hidden from revenuers during Prohibition. There were probably 100 mundane explanations, and Mabel's warnings. Well, she was clearly a superstitious old woman living in an isolated community where everyone still believed in folk tales and ghost stories. I couldn't let myself get caught up in that kind of thinking. I decided to approach the situation rationally. I would spend the day going through more of Uncle Earl's things, looking for any documents or records that might explain what that hole in the barn was. Maybe there were mining claims on the property, or records of some kind of excavation. There had to be a logical explanation. I started in the spare room upstairs, figuring I might as well deal with the trunk. In the daylight, with the sun streaming through the window, the setup looked less ominous and more sad. An old man trying to protect himself with folk remedies and religious symbols. It was the kind of thing people did when they felt powerless against forces they couldn't understand. I swept away the salt and picked up the Bible. It was open to a passage in Psalms, something about the Lord being a refuge and fortress. I set it aside and examined the padlock on the trunk. None of the keys on Uncle Earl's ring fit it. I went back downstairs and searched until I found a pry bar in the kitchen closet. Bringing it back upstairs, I worked on the padlock until it finally gave way with a loud snap. Inside the trunk were papers, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Old letters, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, hand-drawn maps. I sat down on the floor and started going through them. What I found made my blood run cold. The documents dated back over 100 years. The earliest ones were letters written by my great-great-grandfather, the original owner of the property, dated 1878. In them, he wrote about discovering something on the land. A door in the earth, he called it. He said he had found others living down there. People who didn't come out in the daylight. People who had been there since before anyone could remember. At first, he wrote about them with curiosity, even sympathy. He said they seemed peaceful, keeping to themselves in their underground dwellings. But as the letters progressed, the tone changed. He wrote about things going missing from the farm. Animals, at first, then tools, then food. He wrote about seeing them watching from the trees at night, getting closer and closer to the house. The last letter, dated 1879, was incomplete. It ended mid-sentence. They have taken Mary. I am going down to get her, if I do not return. That was it. The letter just stopped there. I found newspaper clippings from around the same time, reports of disappearances in the area. A woman named Mary, my great-great-grandmother, had vanished and was never found. My great-great-grandfather was found dead 3 days later at the bottom of a ravine, his body badly mutilated. The official story was that he had fallen while searching for his wife, but the notes that followed, written by subsequent generations of my family, told a different story. They wrote about the Watchers and the underground people. They wrote about the importance of keeping the entrance sealed, about the salt and the iron and the prayers that kept them at bay, about the deal that had been made, the deal. According to the notes, sometime in the early 1900s, my great-grandfather had made an arrangement with whatever lived in that hole. They would stay underground and leave the family alone. In exchange, the family would never seal the entrance completely, and once every generation they would provide, and then the note ended, the rest of the page torn away. I sat there among the papers, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of elaborate hoax, or the delusions of mentally unstable people passed down through the generations. But then I thought about the footsteps, the figure in the woods, Mabel's warnings, Uncle Earl's haunted expression, and I thought about the fact that I was here now, the last of the family line, the one who had inherited everything. I spent the rest of the day going through the papers, trying to piece together the full story. But there were gaps, missing pages, entire generations that had seemingly left no records. What I could gather was fragmentary and sometimes contradictory. What was clear, though, was that something lived beneath this property, something that had been here for a very long time, and my family had spent generations trying to keep it contained, or at least keep it satisfied. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself increasingly distracted. I kept looking out the windows, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. I kept listening for sounds from outside, footsteps, voices, anything out of the ordinary. The rational part of my mind kept telling me that none of this was real, that I was letting old papers and superstitious nonsense get to me. But another part of me, a deeper, more primal part, knew that I was in danger. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to do something proactive. I went back out to the barn, this time with a plan. I was going to seal that hole. Whatever was down there, whatever my ancestors had believed, I was going to cover it up and be done with it. I found some old planks of wood in the barn and dragged them over to the hole. I started positioning them over the opening, working quickly, trying to get it done before dark. I had maybe an hour of daylight left. I was about halfway done when I heard it, a voice, coming from below. I froze, a plank of wood still in my hands. The voice was faint, barely audible, but it was definitely there. It was saying something over and over. It took me a moment to make out the words. Marcus. Marcus. Come down, Marcus. It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle, almost motherly. But there was something wrong with it, something that made every hair on my body stand on end. We've been waiting for you, Marcus. It's time. Come down. I dropped the plank and ran. I ran out of the barn and across the yard and into the house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then went around checking every window and every other door. I pulled the curtains closed. I grabbed the shotgun. The sun was going down, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that something terrible was going to happen tonight. Night fell over the mountains like a heavy blanket, smothering the last light of day. I sat in the living room with the shotgun across my lap, watching the shadows deepen and listening to the silence. For the first hour, nothing happened. The house was quiet. The forest was quiet. I started to wonder if maybe I had imagined the voice in the barn. Maybe the stress and the lack of sleep were getting to me. Maybe I needed to get out of here, drive back to Columbus, and forget this place ever existed. But then I heard the footsteps. They came from the direction of the barn, crunching through the leaves, growing closer and closer. I stood up and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. In the dim light of the stars, I could see figures emerging from the tree line. Not one figure, not two, at least a dozen, maybe more. They moved slowly, deliberately, spreading out as they approached the house. Their bodies were wrong somehow, proportioned strangely, as if they had spent their lives in spaces that weren't meant for human beings. Their skin was pale, almost white, and their eyes caught the starlight and reflected it back like animals. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. The footsteps reached the porch. The boards creaked under their weight. Multiple sets of footsteps now, moving around the house, surrounding it. And then the knocking started. It came from every direction at once. Doors, windows, walls. A steady, rhythmic knocking that seemed to shake the entire house. And beneath it, I could hear voices. Dozens of voices. All saying the same thing. Marcus. Let us in, Marcus. It's time. I raised the shotgun, pointing it at the front door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. Go away, I shouted. Leave me alone. The knocking stopped. The voices stopped. Everything went silent. And then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. A voice. From inside the house. From upstairs. Marcus. It was Uncle Earl's voice. Marcus, come upstairs. I need to show you something. I stood there, unable to move, unable to think. Uncle Earl was dead. I had seen the death certificate. I had spoken to the lawyer. Uncle Earl was dead and buried and couldn't possibly be upstairs calling my name. Marcus, please, there isn't much time. It sounded exactly like him, the gentle rasp, the slight Appalachian accent, the warmth that I remembered from my childhood. I found myself moving toward the stairs. Some part of me knew it was a trap, knew that whatever was calling me wasn't really my uncle, but another part of me, the part that still missed him, the part that carried 15 years of guilt for never visiting, that part needed to see. I climbed the stairs, one step at a time, the shotgun raised in front of me. The upstairs hallway was dark, but there was a faint light coming from the spare room, the room with the trunk. I walked toward the light, my footsteps impossibly loud in the silence. I reached the doorway and looked inside. The trunk was open, and standing beside it, bathed in the pale glow of a lantern, was a figure. It looked like Uncle Earl. Same height, same build, same flannel shirt and worn jeans, but the face was wrong. It was too smooth, too perfect, like a mask made by someone who had only seen photographs of the real thing. "Thank you for coming, Marcus," it said with Uncle Earl's voice. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." I raised the shotgun, pointing it directly at the thing that wore my uncle's face. "What are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What the hell are you?" It smiled, and the expression was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth, spreading across its face in a way that no human mouth should move. "We are the ones who were here before," it said. "Before your people came with their axes and their fire. Before anyone. We have lived beneath these mountains since the world was young." It took a step toward me, and I stepped back, keeping the gun raised. "Your family made a promise," it continued. "Long ago, when the first of your blood came to this land, they found our door, they woke us from our sleep, and we made a deal." "What kind of deal?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "A simple one. We would leave them in peace, allow them to live on this land, to grow their crops, to raise their families. In exchange, each generation would give us one of their own, a tribute, a gift to ensure the continuation of the arrangement." My stomach turned. "You're saying my family, they gave you people? To do what with?" The thing's smile widened. "To join us, to come below, to become one with the mountain. It's not a punishment, Marcus. It is a gift. Eternal life in the dark places of the earth. Freedom from the burden of the sun." I thought about my great-great-grandmother Mary, about all the unexplained disappearances in the family history, about Uncle Earl, living alone all those years, never marrying, never having children. "Uncle Earl," I said slowly. "He was supposed to be the tribute, wasn't he? But he never came down. He never fulfilled the deal." The thing's smile faded. For the first time, there was something like anger in its expression. "Earl broke the promise," it said, and its voice was no longer gentle, no longer warm. It was cold and ancient and filled with rage. For 50 years he should have come to us, but he used the old protections, the salt, the iron, the words of power. He kept us at bay. "Good," I spat. "He was stronger than you." "Perhaps," the thing admitted. "But Earl is gone now, and you are here, the last of the bloodline, the one who must pay the debt, or the deal is broken forever." "And what happens if the deal is broken?" The thing leaned forward, and I could smell it now, a smell of earth and decay and something else, something older and worse. "Then we take what is owed," it whispered. "Not just you, everyone, every person in these mountains who carries even a drop of your family's blood. We will rise from the earth and we will take them all. Do you understand, Marcus? You are not just choosing for yourself. You are choosing for everyone." I stood there, the weight of what it was saying crushing down on me. I thought about the people in town, Mabel at the general store, the lawyer who had called me. How many of them were distant cousins, connected to my family tree through generations of intermarriage in this small, isolated community. "I don't believe you," I said, but my voice was weak. The thing straightened up, and as it did, its form seemed to shift and flow. becoming less human, more something else, something that belonged in the dark. "Then let me show you," it said, and the walls of the house began to move. I don't know how to describe what happened next. The walls didn't collapse or fall. They flowed, like water or like sand, revealing that the house was surrounded, not just surrounded, but penetrated by tunnels. Tunnels that had been there all along, hidden behind the plaster and the wallpaper, running through the bones of the building itself. And from those tunnels came the others. They poured into the room, dozens of them, their pale bodies writhing and crawling over each other. Some of them still looked almost human. Others had been below so long that they had changed, their bodies adapting to the darkness, becoming something new and terrible. I fired the shotgun. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space, and one of the creatures fell back, shrieking. But the others kept coming, unaffected, unafraid. I turned and ran. I don't remember making a conscious decision. My body just moved, carrying me down the stairs and towards the front door. I could hear them behind me, their bare feet slapping against the wooden floors, their voices calling my name. I burst through the front door and out into the night. The yard was full of them, pale shapes standing between me and the tree line. But there was a gap, a narrow path leading toward where I had parked my truck. I sprinted for it, pumping my legs as hard as they would go. Something grabbed at my arm, and I swung the shotgun like a club, knocking it away. Something else slashed at my back, and I felt hot pain bloom across my shoulder blade. But I kept running. I reached the truck and yanked open the door, throwing myself inside. The keys were in my pocket, and my hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get them in the ignition. In the rearview mirror, I could see them coming, a wave of white bodies flowing across the yard toward me. The engine roared to life. I slammed it into reverse and floored the accelerator, barely missing the first of them as they reached for the door handles. Then I spun the wheel, shifted into drive, and tore down the dirt road as fast as the truck would go. Behind me, I could see them in the headlights, standing in the road, watching me go, and I could hear their voices, carried on the wind, following me down the mountain. "You cannot run, Marcus. The debt must be paid." I drove until I reached Harlan's Creek. I pulled into the parking lot of the general store, which was dark and closed, and sat there with the engine running, trying to stop shaking. My phone had no signal. The town was silent and empty, everyone asleep in their beds, unaware of what lived in the mountains above them. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to call or where to go. Eventually, I just started driving. I got back on the main road and headed west, away from the mountains, away from the property, away from everything. I drove for hours, not stopping until I reached the city limits of Lexington as the sun was coming up. I haven't been back since. That was 5 years ago. I never sold the property. I couldn't, not knowing what was there, not knowing what the new owners might accidentally release. I just left it, abandoned it, let it rot. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. A few months ago, I started hearing news reports about disappearances in eastern Kentucky, hikers going missing in the Daniel Boone National Forest, families vanishing from isolated cabins, bodies found in ravines, badly mutilated, supposedly from animal attacks. And last week, I got a letter. It had no return address, and the postmark was from Harlan's Creek. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "The debt remains. The blood calls. We are waiting, Marcus. We have always been waiting." I don't know what to do. I've thought about going to the police, but what would I tell them? I've thought about going back, about trying to finish what Uncle Earl started, about finding a way to seal that hole forever. But I'm afraid. I'm so afraid. Because I know they're right. I can't run forever. Sooner or later, I'm going to have to go back to those mountains, back to that house, back to the darkness beneath the earth. And when I do, they'll be waiting for me. They've always been waiting. And that, my friends, is where Marcus's account ends. He submitted this story to me several months ago, and I've tried to reach out to him multiple times since then for an update. My messages have gone unanswered. My calls go straight to voicemail. I don't know what happened to Marcus. I don't know if he went back to that property or if he's still out there somewhere, running from a debt that can never be outrun. What I do know is that the Appalachian Mountains hold secrets that most of us will never understand. Things that were old when the first humans crossed into this land. Things that remember deals made in blood and broken promises that echo across generations. If you ever find yourself in those deep hollows and ancient ridges, pay attention to the stories the locals tell. There's usually more truth in them than we'd like to admit. And if you ever inherit property from a relative you haven't spoken to in years, maybe, just maybe, ask a few questions before you go to claim it. Because some inheritances come with prices that aren't listed in any will. Stay safe out there. Nightfall Archive. I'll see you in the next one.